really appreciate the chance to be able to talk a little bit more about my experience and kind of a topic that has been really gaining a lot of interest, and I think is really important as companies think about building their product strategy and really how do they compete in this type of market. So to kick things off, the first thing I actually want to talk about a little bit is what is data-driven product management. This slide will be almost all of the Spanish to the entire presentation. So when I talk about data-driven product management, so product management overall is oftentimes thinking about your product strategy. What do I build? When do I build it? How quickly? What do we invest in? And the data component, which is one of the big buzzwords now. Everyone wants data. You need to track everything and log everything. But at what point do you actually take the data and how do you use that to improve both your business, your product, and deliver a better user experience? So when I think about data-driven product management, it really is around when you're using the data to inform the decisions you're making about your product. And in the end result, you're going to deliver a better user experience and help meet the goals of your company. One thing too, as I'm going along, I'll try and restrict both jargon. I'll also, actually quick raise of hands, who's super comfortable with English? All right, great. I'll try not to talk too fast. I know sometimes I can lose people. But and also if there's any questions or anything, any words that are maybe terms or phrases that I've used, just raise your hand. I will try and either explain or I will jump to my assistant. So in terms of what I want to talk about today, for the time that we have together, I want to just give a little bit of introduction to who I am, some of my experience around working with data and product, talk about a kind of data thinking evolution. And this is something I've seen both in companies and also as an industry, how people are thinking about using data, how it informs the product, and how this process is going along. There's the data-driven product approach that I've seen kind of used or really adopt, and that I talk about with companies I've seen in companies that I've worked with, teams that I've been on, and clients that I have now. And then there's the actual analytics and tools platform, so getting a little bit technical in terms of what it actually would look like to get this type of data and information and getting it to the team so they can use it. And then want to start going deep. So the first part will be a lot of overview, kind of broad aspects to data-driven product management. Then I kind of want to go a little bit deeper in terms of multivariate and A/B testing, which is a core component of a lot of data-driven product strategies, and kind of share some learnings that I've picked up over time, some hard lessons learned. And then lastly, end it with just some stories and examples, things that I've come across, interesting use cases around how having this kind of data-driven thinking has delivered results for companies. So starting out with who am I? Basically, what do I know and why should you listen to anything I have to say? First off, I'm Damien Peters, and just to prove that it is me, before I had the beard, I wore the same shirt. So it really is me. So right now, I'm the principal of Victorian Consulting Group, and it's a small consulting group I started. So after leaving tech, after wanting a bit more location independence and wanting my son to learn Spanish, we moved here and started this company. We focus on product strategy, digital marketing, IT project management. And we're based here in Valencia, but work remotely with some U.S. clients and then available for across the EU. As mentioned before, I am from America, if my accent didn't give it away. But I live here in Valencia, España. Estoy aprendiendo español ahora, pero mi español es muy bueno. And we've been here about 9 months, and it's really been a great experience coming to enjoy and understand the learning Spain. So I also run Wealth Noir, which is a financial media website focused on helping millennials build wealth through real estate investing, stock investing, things along those lines. Personal passion that something I really feel there's a problem I wanted to address, so I created a company to do it. Before that, most of my product experience has been at Facebook. I was there a little under 4 years. I first started working on location-based products, and actually around a lot of the data collection and cleansing of our location-based products there. If you ever wondered why you can check into like a food cart stand, it was partially because of my team. We were trying to map the entire world. There's another company that was down the street that begins with a G. they were doing it also. It was a heated battle at work. I digress. And then my second team was actually on advertising measurement, where we were actually building the data measurement products used by advertisers on Facebook. And this included, particularly my area was around brand measurement, which is a very hairy beast of, if someone saw a Coke ad on TV and saw a billboard, which one actually drove the sale of Coke and how much Coke did they buy from the billboard versus the TV ad? It's a lot of math. It's complicated sport. I'm also an advisor for Dev Color, a nonprofit based in the Bay Area, focuses on Black software engineers. I got my master's in business administration, my MBA from MIT Sloan School of Management. Before Facebook, worked at two other gaming startups in California, in the Bay Area, TinyCo and Zynga. And before that, I earned my computer science and also an economics degree at University of Maryland, and then went into consulting, working for government clients for 7 years in DC. It's extremely boring work, which is why I moved to California. And then stuff. So starting off, talking about this kind of data thinking evolution. This is something I've seen both with companies I've worked with across the industries. You see tools kind of evolve and grow, and oftentimes you can spend a few minutes with a company, ask a couple of questions, and understand where they are in this process actually. So we're going to go through a hypothetical example of, we'll use Uber as an example, because everyone knows Uber. They're now finally here in Valencia. And it's a service-based company. So it's great because they have an app, which is important to their business, but their business is getting you from point A to point B. You can do it over text message, you can do it over email, you can do it with carrier pigeons if you wanted, but the app is a big component to the company. So let's go into the minds of like the app team. So Uber's been around, been testing it, using carrier pigeons, text messages, and now we're going to launch the app. So great, first launch the app. The app is launched, and everyone's like, we need to get users. We need to get users using the app. What is a user? No one cares. We just need to get them. Investors want to see users in order to get our Series B, C, D, E, and then the IPO, and then some follow-on investment from SoftBank, and then users. So when you start out, the first thing that oftentimes I've seen with many companies is you just launch the app. The only source of information you have coming in is going to be from the App Store. Google will tell you how many people downloaded it. Apple will tell you how many people downloaded it. Microsoft will tell you how many people are not downloading it because no one uses Windows Phone. And this is what you focus on. You're like, well, to get users, we must get downloads. So you think about downloads. You're thinking about what PR can we get? Can we get a blogger to write about us? What marketing, what search app store optimizations can we do? Can we get featured? One company I worked at, we actually had someone go to Apple I believe it was every 2 weeks, to have lunch with friends, just in the hopes that one of those friends could get us featured. After maybe 6 months, we got featured, and all of those lunches were worth it, but this is oftentimes what it takes to get featured and ranked, and this is oftentimes a lot of the strategies you'll see companies employ when they first launch their app. At some point, all of the organic and free and buying coffees for Apple employees doesn't work out, and someone says, let's buy some ads, let's put some marketing behind it. And so now we move into this clicks model. We evolve. We're saying, well, clicks drive downloads, and we're paying for the clicks. We don't know where our downloads are coming from, but we can track a click. I can tell you whether I paid for that click, whether it was organic, whether someone went to the site on their own. So you start moving to this click, and you start having your teams think about how can we get the most clicks at the best price. This often tends to be the introduction to the data-driven marketing era, as I like to call it. Most companies tend to start first with market data and thinking about their marketing from a data-driven standpoint, and then eventually move on to more product thinking. So you're getting clicks, you're focused on getting the cheapest clicks, getting in networks, you're optimizing ad creatives and stuff, and then someone actually says like, hey, maybe we should track something going on in the app, not just people downloading it, and they'll install some type of SDK or start adding logging. And then we move into the world of like sign-ups and app open. Someone says, hey, what's really important is whether someone opens the app, not just whether they downloaded it. There's a lot of stats that show how many people download apps and never open them, or they'll open them once, or just downloading an app doesn't mean you'll sign up for the service. It doesn't mean that you'll order an Uber ride. It doesn't mean that you'll put in your credit card information. And this tends to be an epiphany. Now in 2019, it may be somewhat silly for some of you to think that, of course, the app open counts. Of course, someone actually using the app counts. But for a long period of time, and for many companies, I've seen this over and over, they don't think about it that way. They actually come to an epiphany that not just getting someone to install the app, because you kind of think you grow in this process. It's an evolution. So at the signups and app opens, we now move from our growth-driven area. And I call this a growth-driven area because this is typically the number one thing you think about when you first launch. How can I get more people to use it to install it? Most of your desire is driven by the goal of getting more people into your application. Then we evolve and move into the user-driven area. So now our thinking starts to move a little bit further past just how many accounts are being created, how many users do I have, and more important metrics. First, we start thinking about engagement. So what are they doing in the app? All right, great. We've gotten them in. I now realize that we've gotten people in. We get them to put in their credit card information. They've created an account, but no one's ordering a ride. Why is that? Is it because there's no cars close to them? Is it because it's actually a 45-minute wait? Is it because the map is actually translocated them to Oakland, California when they didn't realize they moved to Valencia? What are the reasons that are causing this type of that are stopping us from getting the conversion to action to sales, whatever it is that we need? This tends to be like a flood and kind of a aha moment where teams start to think. And this is oftentimes when you get overwhelmed with the amount of data you track, right? Is it the zoom level of the map? Is it how I transcode the address? Is it a pinpoint location versus typing in the name? How important is it that I know the name of a place to get someone to get a cab from that place versus having them pick how much does the experience within the cab affect them? You also will start thinking about potentially other metrics like, well, we have a bunch of people coming into the app every single day. Can we have an ad in there? What other ways are there to monetize? What else can we do? So at some point, you really start thinking about your user, and then you start getting obsessed. Someone has a smart idea, and they say, like, well, we're thinking about users and usership in the app. Oftentimes, you move into time spent within the app at this part of the stage. Someone says, well, you know what? One person using the app twice a week is actually the same as two people using the app once a week. As far as we care, that typically results the same. So what are we thinking about how often people are coming back into the app? What are we thinking about how many times they're canceling their accounts or quitting or going to a competing service? And then retention tends to start becoming this another thought. What are we doing around our push notifications? How's our marketing and our emails and our follow-ups and purchases helping to bring people back to our app, back to our site, back to our service? How is it all tied together? And here's where you really are now focused more on the user journey. You're now thinking about actions that your users are taking and how it's driving your business results. Then one of the final stage in this user-driven area goes into optimization. Someone says, well, we figured out that people care a lot about whether they type in the address to a restaurant versus whether they type in the name of the restaurant versus whether they use a PIN. How can we tell which is the best default experience to put someone into? Someone says, like, hey, we could split up every user and give a third of them the PIN, give a third of them, encourage a third of them to type in the name of the restaurant, encourage a third of them to use the address. What will that do? At this point, you now start to have understandings from how engagement and retention are moving, how they're tying to sales or revenue or whatever your core metric is. And now you're starting to come up with hypotheses to test and understand what's going to impact your users, your product, and your business. Then after that, you conquer the world, because after you get all this, you just keep doing it over and over again, and then everyone uses your app, which is obviously how it works in the real world. This is not true at all, but it's a little bit of a subtle Facebook thing. So after you see this data, this evolution in thinking, you see this in particular companies, and they start out with just like, we need to get people to download our app, and suddenly they're at a point of where they can A/B test whether the color of a button impacts the amount of tea ordered in China. That may be a regional joke. But then now that we understand this process overall, what does it actually look like inside of a company? Like, this is great, it's cool, there's a bunch of metrics and numbers. What does it look like for a product team to actually start incorporating this data? And this is a problem that I face for both clients, I face on different teams. Different teams have had different levels of understanding about the data that their own product and how their own users are using their own product and bringing that together. So this is the data-driven product approach that both have researched and seen talk with other PMs in the space, and my own analytics I've used across different teams. But this kind of core premise is oftentimes when I face a company who's going through an issue of we have some data, we think there's data, but we don't know how to actually use it. This is kind of the approach I suggest and go through. First thing many people start with is need data. Need a bunch of data. We've got to go get a bunch of data. I'm going to hire a bunch of people to start logging everything. I'm going to buy a platform to instantly start logging everything. Without data, how can I have data-driven product management? Data's cool. You do need data. But first, what do you actually need as a business? This is a common misstep I see where you think blah, blah, blah mentioned daily active users, so we need to track daily active users. Well, actually, your product works on a monthly cycle. People buy once a month or once a week. So why are you tracking daily active users? I don't know. I saw it in TechCrunch. That's not a good idea when you start thinking about your product stack. So start with the company's needs, right? Facebook is an example. Mark, oftentimes, it would be every 6 months to a year, there would be a thing that was the most important thing. At one point, it was mobile. Right, so Facebook sucked on mobile and was like, we have to get good on mobile. You are not allowed to go to a product review to talk to a director or a VP and show a mock or a diagram of your feature if it did not include a mobile-first mock or design of what that would look like. If it's important to the company, everyone should be working on it. Similarly, so when connections between people became very important, every team learned how to translate their own data into metrics that showed around connection, how many connections between two human beings were we making. And so the needs of the company drive a lot of the thinking. If you don't start there, then oftentimes you can be off. But let's assume you know what your company needs, right? You need, let's say, HIP, right? Very common. We need more money. But even, what are the goals then if you need more money? Is that more recurring revenue? Is it more new activations? You need new accounts? Is it that you need a better profit margin, so you need to make more money per sale? What is the actual goal that you want to set up? After you come up with these goals, so you need more money, what that actually means as a goal is we want to increase the number of new activations by 25%. We want to increase our average revenue per user by another 10%. And this will lead to X number of dollars, which will let us get either another round of funding or return value to our shareholders. Then we start thinking about the metrics. All right, great. You said that you need more money. You said what more money looks like. How are we actually going to track that? How do we know that next quarter we're closer as opposed to further away? And this is when you start breaking down, all right, sales actually is both returning sales versus new sales. It's the average dollar value per basket when someone checks out. On a user side, is it monthly, is it daily, is it weekly users? What's the ratio of monthly users to daily users? Does that matter? How can we, and the goal here is to start breaking down these numbers in a way that everyone can track, understand, and really apply their day-to-day decision-making using the needs of the company. Data and metrics, especially when it comes to product management, is a great way to keep everyone aligned. On teams where I've found extremely great success is, one story in particular was I had an artist on one of my games that I was working on. Oftentimes our discussions would be on whether the purple unicorn stood on 2 legs versus 4 legs. This is a big thing in gaming, whether animals walk on all fours versus stand up. It's a whole, there's a word, I can't remember it, or I can't pronounce it, but it's around making animals human-like. It has implications around whether they're mating versus whether they're just making magic. It's an annoying process. Long story short, she got to a point where she started to understand how, okay, in order to determine whether the animal should stand up or down, is there information we can look at? Can we do a test where I show these 2 creatives to a bunch of people and see who clicks on what? Can we try one animal that's not standing up and one that is and see how that actually comes to our metrics? The reason I always use her as an example, her clock in her house didn't have numbers on it. She hated numbers. It actually had colors, and she could tell the time from the colors on the clock. So when she came to me asking about the change in revenue per customer, I almost cried. So now that we have metrics, that are based on the goals for our company, which are based on the needs of that company, we gotta start collecting data. Data can be collected indiscriminately, but oftentimes, depending on how many users and what you're tracking, you will blow up the amount of data that you're tracking. It may be too hard to find anything useful, or you may just blow your cost out of the water when it comes to using one of these platforms or systems. So now you start thinking about, all right, in order to track daily active users, I need to define what does it mean to be an active user. I need to be able to track that on a daily basis. I need a certain level of redundancy. I need to understand that I'm not losing half of my population because of bad cell phone connections. You need to start understanding where the data is going to live, how is it going to be accessible, and how are we going to start using it. Now that you've set all of this up, you have this clean little system, right? You now have an app that has started tracking events and logs based on the metrics that matter most to the company because of the goals that we've set and the needs. And now comes the actual fun part where we say you start moving into the day-to-day data-driven product management, which is the optimization and analysis. Analysis starts where we think and start looking for trends and information and learnings from our data. Why is it that everyone with less than 5 friends quits Facebook after 4 weeks, and everyone over 15 friends stays on? There's actually a graph where if you ever see the average number of friends for everyone on Facebook, I think the magic number is around 20. Like, there's almost no one with less than 20 friends, and then suddenly a ton of people with 20 friends, and then there's like a normal distribution. The reason this is because years ago someone did the math. They figured out that the biggest indicator to you being a successful user of Facebook was your ability to get to 20 friends on Facebook. This had an impact on your news feed. This had an impact on the reasons to come back into it, how many push notifications were sent to you from a friend. All of these things were prefaced on having friends. And once we understood that 20 was the prime number, it was the number where, I might be making up 20, it was some number, I don't remember it, and I probably shouldn't say it if I did remember it. But the point is, we now were able to think about growth, and friending became a big, important fact as we thought about growing user base, because we understood that your experience within the first couple of days had a larger impact than whether we got you from Google AdSense, whether we convinced you to come from a TechCrunch article, or whether it was a YouTube ad. And these are the type of learnings that you figure out and think about. From a learning like that, you would then develop a hypothesis. Well, if 20 is great, is 21 better, or is 19 better? And the way this actually played out in the product experiences, Facebook looks extremely different if you have 0, 5, or below the magic number of friends until after. Literally, the app is designed to help you find your friends, help you connect with other people, because we know that is an extremely important experience. Once it's done, hey, enjoy newsfeed, like some photos, comment on your friends. Look, here's a funny cat video. No cat videos for you until you get 20 friends. I'm exaggerating, but you get it. One of the big reasons and the benefits for data-driven product management and data-driven product thinking is to defeat the Hippo. Hopefully everyone agrees with it. So the Hippo stands for the highest paid person's opinion. This is usually the CEO. This is oftentimes or a director or a manager or a VP. And as we see in this example here, the team has come, they've presented a bunch of data, they've gone out, they've gotten metrics, but there's a Hippo in the room. He likes option B, we're going to go with option B. The truth of the matter is, corporate hierarchies are typically set up, and most of them are, and you see this with a lot of tech companies attempting to be more a meritocracy. But oftentimes, the person who has the most say wins. I used to work in government consulting. The way our budgets were oftentimes defined for the department I was supporting wasn't by the actual need. We were working on Navy installations. So this is for the American Navy. How many are the ships working? Are the docks up to code? The decision to whether you would spend money to build the docks, to improve the docks, wasn't based on whether the docks were working or not. It was based on who won the golf tournament between the two guys who were arguing over who got more money. This is an exaggeration, of course, but this is something that data helps break through, because the truth is no one is infallible. I'll have a story later too about that. But no one is infallible, and that evidence and the truth is what you should seek, not just to move an agenda. One thing too I do like to say is that this whole process is a lot harder than you think. And it may be that you think it's hard, which is great, but I don't need to tell you this. But oftentimes you can see these slides, you're like, oh, it's great. This clearly makes sense. There's a bunch of metrics. We're going to store some data, and then like the team will start to use this data and start thinking about it. When I show everybody the picture, they'll be like, oh, we can't have a hippo. Everyone will suddenly start turning down the hippo. No, it's not true. It's not going to happen like that. It's going to be a process. There will be learnings that come along the way. You'll make some mistakes. You'll get better. It's a continual process. And then when you perfectly master the process, what will happen is the algorithm in the App Store will change and all your data will go to hell and something else will come up. Or you'll have all the metrics for your app. Everything will be going great. You'll see a drop. None of your metrics will explain, and then you'll actually figure out that someone launched a competing app and they're just stealing all your users, which the metrics didn't clearly show because that was outside of your in-app metrics. So anyways, this is harder than you think. Human nature is human nature. We do have biases. We do lean to feel strongly about things we feel strongly about. So something to think about as you think about doing more data-driven product management in your own organizations, in your regular job. And this is whether you're the product manager, whether you're UX, whether you're working in data analytics, if you're an engineer. The truth is, on my teams, every single person, including my artist who didn't like numbers, knew what our numbers were. She knew at least the 3 most important things and could understand how they were driving the product and what she could do to help improve that. So I want to get a little bit more technical. I want to go into talking a little bit about what data platform could look like for your company. This is what I've seen for several different companies that I've worked in or worked for, based on you just research kind of what is out there, things along those lines. So the first thing is you definitely see at larger companies, ones that can afford and definitely have the resources and the engineers, they will build an internal data stack. They don't want to share the data with the outside world. They're afraid that some other competitor may be able to get access to their users, their metrics. I as Instagram, for example, don't want Twitter to know how much time people spend on the news feed versus liking friends, because they could use that and maybe get better and vice versa. So oftentimes companies approach this internal data stack. And what does this actually look like? So when it starts with logging the user events. Basically, if you don't have any way in the software that you're giving to people, whether it's a website, whether it's an app, whether it's a downloadable product software that you're installing in your computer, whether it is actually like this chair. Theoretically, this company could put a bunch of sensors in this chair and track how many times I go back in it before it breaks, and then use that to inform the product thinking. But the thing is, you're going to start logging user events. Typically for this, you want some software or platform that can support A/B testing, which is that multivariate testing I'll talk about more later. But this part of the system is where when a person clicks a button, it should fire off an event. It should be able to show 2 different buttons and track that this person will show these 2 different buttons, and also consistently show that person this button to ensure that you're getting correct data to understand the results of your experiments. Next is a data warehouse. So think of it as a big trash can in the sky where you're dumping all your data. And I say that because it's not going to be a MySQL database or Postgres or a SQL or relational database. It's very hard at scale to throw that much data haphazardly, randomly into a structured database without it crashing. It can get very expensive. It gets hard. So oftentimes, like a Hadoop, AWS Redshift, other data document storage databases, where you can kind of dump data and retrieve it at some point in time. Oftentimes, these data warehouses tend to be slow to query. They're harder to query. They're harder to use. So they're typically meant just as a storage place. It's like kind of a cold storage for information that will be used later by the business intelligence database. So the business intelligence database is going to transform your data warehouse. And this was the setup at TinyCo, at Facebook, at Singa, I believe we used to say. It was a similar system where there was a bunch of servers and processes that would go to this big garbage can, pull out all of the data, start to sort it, put it into the correct places, structure it correctly, ensure that it would clean bad data. So sometimes a log may get fired twice because the person has spotty phone connection. It would figure out all these issues and present something usable that was accessible. And this is going to be typically accessed by your data analyst or data scientist. Also your product managers. Depends on the companies. Some companies will have their PMs be very comfortable with the data. Some they won't. Sometimes it's kind of a personal choice here. But then lastly, you get to the reporting. So there's an old adage which nothing anything that's not tracked never gets improved. I'm butchering it. Shouldn't do this before again. But basically, what it's saying is, if you care about users, and users are hidden away in a database that the one PhD on the team can access, I question how much you actually care about users. For my team in particular, we always had at least one big screen for the team. So we had a pod similar to the desk here. I'd have a screen at the end of the table, and it would show what our numbers were yesterday, the week before. It showed our month-over-month growth, our day-over-day, our week-over-week. And there were many times where we would come into work and be like, what is going on? Everything's breaking. Oh my God. Oh my God. We actually cursed a lot more, but I'll turn it to my first presentation. But being able to see the data and act on it, being involved, understanding that, well, it dropped 10% because it's Sunday. It always drops on Sunday because everyone turns off their phone or whatever it may be. And that happens as you start reporting and looking at the analytics. There's several systems that are good for this. Metabase is a free open source one that I've used with a client before. Tableau is very, very popular, which I've used at every single tech company I've actually worked at, now I think about it. But it comes to dashboarding and making the analytics accessible. Now, building your own internal data stack is a lot of work. It does take time and effort. Luckily, in the world of technology in 2019, there's a ton of companies that will do every single one of those things that I just mentioned within minutes. By far the easiest, free, most common solution is anyone with a web platform. If you install Google Analytics, it's like, here's what everyone is doing on your web page overnight, right? Here's every single page, here's how much time they spent, here's when they left, here's where they came from. You start adding in UTM tracking tags. There's a lot of information you start getting for free. There's a lot more advanced systems. Mixpanel is one that I've worked with personally a couple of times, quite popular with a lot of startups. AppsFlyer I haven't used personally, but seems to get a lot of really good reviews. Flurry is another free one. They're actually owned now by Yahoo, which is now owned by Verizon. Last time I used it, I think they were still independent. But it's a free platform. It does offer app tracking in particular. But the point is, there are a lot of systems where all you have to do, at the easiest, you can just drop it in. It will start figuring some stuff out and give you some reports. In a more detailed, thoughtful way, you're going to have your engineering team or developers, or if you use a non-engineering based solution, go in and mark the important events. Tell the service what is the sign up button looks like. Tell the service what checking out looks like. Indicate when someone's going to get a push notification when they actually come back into the app. Because if it's not going to be logged, you're not going to be able to answer the question. There have been many times in my experience where we've logged something not knowing if it would actually be useful, and then 8 months later something blew up and it was like, I'm glad that you checked in how many people looked. I'm trying to think of some esoteric example of how many times the phone got dropped in the bathroom. Some we couldn't track, obviously. But the point is, there are a lot of metrics that we found when things went wrong. Actually, 3 months ago, we were so glad that someone wrote in that little error.log statement in order to capture that event and understand what happened. So that's a lot of the kind of the basics of like data-driven product management. It's kind of the overview, what it looks like, some actual systems, kind of get it implemented, what it may look like for your company, for your job. And what I want to do is go a little bit deeper into specifically A/B and multivariate testing. And what I'm going to do here is, this is its own 8-hour lecture textbook on its own. I'm just going to pull out some things that I've seen come up a lot and you may not necessarily think about when you first start doing A/B testing. Just to explain A/B testing and multivariate testing. A/B testing is I have two different options. I'll present them. I'll segment my user base. I'll present them both options, and I will see what happens given that I present them both options. Easy version of this: you have a login button, or let's say sign up button. If it's red, green, or blue, which one works better? An A/B test is testing one variation, so in this case, color. Multivariate is testing two different things. So we may test the color along with whether it's bold or not bold. That would be multivariate. The important thing here is that it's not simply I'm testing three colors and two in bold and unbold. You actually have 6 segments that you need to understand. And the reason that is important is because when you start thinking about sample size and statistical significance, it's extremely important. I'll try and keep this not overtly statistics and math heavy, but long story short, if you have a sample of population, so we took everyone in this room, and I said, I want to understand how many men and women I have in the room. I could go over here and I could ask these two gentlemen, are you men and women? They say, identify as male, and I could then apply that everyone in the room is male. Obviously, you see the error in my ways. I didn't ask enough people. For the number of people in this room, 2 people wasn't a representative sample. 2 people in almost any case is never going to be a representative sample. There's actually several calculators you can use to understand and calculate your sample size given what's called a confidence interval. So the way from a statistics standpoint is you'd say, I want to be 95% sure that this 10% change is actually a 10% change. And what the calculator will do is like in order to see a 10% change in one variant over a population of 500, 500,000, a million people, you need to observe X number of events. The very loose statistical rule is 30 events. It's kind of the bare minimum, but realistically it depends on the confidence interval. Trying to pick up a 1% change, so going back to the color test of blue versus red. If I see the button improve signups by 1%, and it's a small population, 100 people, I may say like, well, 1% is really small. 100 people is not a lot out of the 100 million users that I have in a given month. How confident am I at 1%? If that actually was 10%, by statistics, you would be more confident in a 10% change because it's a greater change than you would be in a 1% change. As I mentioned, this in of itself is its own large talk, but several systems do work now to help you do some of the statistical testing to understand if you're within your confidence interval or not. Going back to my example about advertising measurement, one of the hard problems we faced was in order to be confident that the 20 people that we know saw this Coca-Cola ad and they bought Coca-Cola, so was this 20%, but they also saw 85 other things. And we can only track 20 of the 85 potential advertisements they would have seen. Can we be confident, even if we did a test and we say everyone who saw the TV ad bought more Coke, because there was also a bunch of other stuff that happened, can we be confident that the reason they bought more Coke was because of the TV ad? Was it actually because they saw the TV ad because they watch way more TV, and therefore people who watch way more TV buy more Coke on average, so therefore they would buy more Coke? Was it actually because the city they live in, there's a big billboard that we put up, and that billboard actually moved it? Or maybe they're just all really big Britney Spears fans. Was she the spokesperson? I'm dating myself a little bit, but there's other things that you need to take into account. And so when it comes to sample size and statistical significance, this is a bit of a science, but it's something to keep top of mind depending on where you are within your A/B and multivariate testing. So I chose this picture because I love the analogy of finding love when it comes to A/B testing in the short term versus long term. You know when you meet some person, first date is magical, it's great, you want to marry them, everything, it seems like you've hit the lottery, and then you realize 7 months later, Poco Loco, They're dead, they're junky, they eat too much, no tengo, no trabajo hard. So the same thing you see oftentimes in these type of experiments. We do a test, we change the color to blue for the signups. Okay, genial. It's great. We drove signups by 10%. Let's roll out and make the button blue. Well, actually what happens is 3 months later we found out, for whatever reason, the fact that that button was blue and the fact that every other button is green, they actually have a worse experience. They feel like they were lied to. Show them the blue button. Now you've got a bunch of green buttons. And it's shocking at times. You would be surprised by things that play out long term. You launch a new product, your sales are up. You made more money, it's great. Actually, you're cannibalizing all your other sales. You don't realize that the new product is actually more of a substitute for your older product than you thought. For short term, you wanted to get more users, so we created this great new advertising campaign. And the advertising campaign works, and you get a bunch of new users at a cheaper cost, and you realize that the retention is worse because you just put a picture of a famous person in the ad campaign, and that's why they clicked it. And after 2 months, they figured out, like, oh, this has nothing to do with Antonio Banderas. So understanding short-term versus long-term is going to be important. This also comes back into the sample size, things like that. But just understand that there's a time component when you are doing the A/B test. Going back to the more human aspect of it, accept the truth. All right? If the data tells you it failed, it failed. I understand it was your baby. Blue buttons was the thing that you were born to create. You spent all night designing that blue button. It's so blue. But the test says it's bad. So understand that it's bad. It isn't a baby that you birthed. It was an idea. It was a hypothesis. The goal is to test it, and your goal is to get to the truth, not to prove yourself right. Or prove the Hippo wrong. On the contrary, one test failed. If that shade of blue didn't work, maybe another shade, maybe red is actually the key. Sometimes people will give up too quickly. They'll say, like, I made a change, everyone hated it, don't make any more changes. The product will not change for the next 25 years. If anyone has randomly used part of PayPal's internal UX, some of it hasn't changed. Google, several of their payment platforms, and they're actually the ad manager for Google AdSense, no one wanted to change it because they were afraid it would hurt revenue. They were like, we can't change it. We won't. 0.5% of several $1 billion is a lot of money. Right? Someone's losing their job. So you see this all the time. So understand that your test failed. You may still be on the right path. Make that decision, move forward. Protect the sacred cows. It's very easy to get caught up in the one thing you're trying to move or change when you're doing your test and ignore that you just dropped revenue 30% in order to get more users or to increase likes, right? It's easy to say I'm working, example, going back to Facebook or like Instagram, I'm changing the algorithm for newsfeed. I have proven that I can get more people to look at news as my timeline in Instagram. Oh, actually, what you ended up doing, though, was there were a bunch of people whose content you've now hidden, and they all have more or worse experiences because they're getting less likes, and so now they don't like Instagram because they don't think they have any friends. There's all these second, third, 85th tier consequences that can happen. So oftentimes with the A/B test, it's important to have like your core metrics at the top of the company. Track them across every single A/B test, even if the test has nothing to do with it. Track the change and impact on revenue for a user engagement feature. Track the impact on signups and conversion for launching a new product. You'd be shocked sometimes the accidents that you can create by trying something new and having too much tunnel vision. With all of that being said, I want to end with just some random examples. I've sprinkled a couple of these throughout, but some examples and stories just from my years of product management and craziness of California. So this is actually an interview question that a colleague of mine created, and I really love, and it's a great example of kind of this data-driven product thinking and how it impacts what you do. So if you haven't seen this picture before, this is actually a picture from Snapcash. It was a feature they launched years ago where you could pay another person. And as you see the person, it looks like they're throwing dollar bills. That was the feature. To order to pay someone $3, you would swipe 3 times, right? So the question we would ask is, hey, some engineer built peer-to-peer payments, and they're going to launch it tomorrow. They've now put a PM on the project. By the way, this is a very realistic way, in particular with Facebook. Projects are oftentimes built, and then at some point someone says, like, wait, why did we build it? Maybe we should think about what good this is going to create. Very common scenario. So you're now the PM, and you need to think about what are the goals and metrics for Snapchat, for this peer-to-peer payment system in a social network. Actually, because I've been talking too long, does anyone have either, love to hear thoughts, ideas, either on approaching this? Anyone has any thought on what are the goals for creating peer-to-peer payments in a social network? So all raise your hand at once. All right. So the most common answer you would get, and especially no negative, nothing negative about Amazon PMs, but Amazon PMs think a lot about revenue. So the first time in particular, they're kind of easy to pick on sometimes, but they would say money, right? It's a payments feature, right? We want to make some type of money. That's the goal of this project. So I want to track how much revenue is generated. And then you pause and say, like, well, thank you for coming. Really appreciate your time here. Feel free to get some free sodas. And the reason was because this answer was very off. They didn't think holistically about why a social network company may launch a peer-to-peer payments feature. Going through that little framework that I said before, if we start with the needs of the company. At this time, Snap wanted to grow. They wanted more users. They may think, or some of they may come up, or one of their understandings may be that, well, we've realized that our retention or the amount of people that come back are all dependent on how many times they engage with another person. So actually, as a company, we really, really are focused on how many times how many people a person interacts with in a given week over Snapchat. So if we can get them to watch a video, share a video, send a message, or send a payment, that is another touch point between another human being, and that's actually what we care about. With that being said, this completely changes what the product looks like and what you're going to focus on, because you're focused on creating engagement between two people and not generating revenue for the company. If I want to generate revenue for the company, I'm going to go to Mercadona. I'm going to sign them up as a partner. I'm going to allow people to pay for their bills. I'm going to allow people to pay for their rent because I want to move as much money as possible so I can make a rate. If I'm actually caring about, also, I wouldn't make a Make It Rain feature to pay your rent. Who wants to swipe 500, 600 times every month to pay their rent? It seems stupid. How would I pay 50 cents? Do I turn it around and it's coins and I drop the coins like this? So the goals of the company, the needs of the company, which led to the goals of the company, which formed around the metrics that they were tracking, are actually completely different than what this person was saying. And because they didn't think about that, they kind of instantly assumed something and would have led this product down a completely different trajectory that would not have meshed well with the company and what they were trying to do. Oh, this story is, so Mark Zuckerberg is very, for everyone at Facebook, he just kind of walks around all the time. My wife, who's here, she bumped into him we were at the ice cream shop, and he came in to get some ice cream. And her friend was there, she's like, oh my God, it's Mark Zuckerberg. It's like, no, he walks around all the time. It's pretty boring. He really does wear the same shirt. Super nice guy. Pulled out in front of me in front of the parking lot. But there's one story that he told early on when I joined the company, and he's told a couple of times, which just really made me feel good about both working there and just in general around defeating the Hippo. And this question was, is it Messenger, a separate messaging app, or is it just Facebook Messages, which is, while I'm using Facebook, it's a way to message my friends? So a little bit of backstory. When Messenger became its own thing, this wasn't just a walk-in hey, we think it's cool if we create a separate messaging app. It sounds like a good idea. Yeah, it's a good idea. Mark hated it. He passionately fought against them separating Messenger from Facebook Messages. He was like, it doesn't make any sense. You go to Facebook to see your friends and then you message them. Why would I message them if I'm not on Facebook? Right? And over several meetings, and he never really explained exactly the data that went him over, but more or less they wore him down. They came back to him time and time again with more data, with more information. They showed mocks. They had interviews from users. And at some point he said, fine, I still don't think it's going to work, but do it because clearly there's a bunch of data supporting you. Just because I started the company doesn't mean I get to choose what happens. And he says this was one of his happiest moments that he hires people who would tell him he's wrong. Because Messenger, while we're here in Europa, WhatsApp es mejor, pero en Estados Unidos, Messenger es mejor. Messenger's, I believe it still is, or it definitely was, the most used messaging app in the United States outside of SMS. We have a lot different relationship with SMS and phones, so SMS, text messages are still a very, very popular communication platform. Therefore, a need for WhatsApp, when it launched, no one used WhatsApp. It was like, why? I can just send a text message. And then even there's the $1. It's like, why would I pay $1? We oftentimes get text for free. But this ended up being a huge win for the company. It ended up growing, appealing to a much larger user base. And you can actually sign up for a Messenger account without having a Facebook account. This was one important case of where data won over the Hippo, and a better decision was made, and the company was made better for it. Another example, and this is particular to one product team that I was working on, my first team at the company, was the Facebook editor. Now, most of you have probably never heard of the Facebook editor. Facebook editor is the platform that we use, and it's crowdsourcing of location data on Facebook. Basically, someone checks into this office, they may enter in the address, but not the zip code, so we'll try and figure out the zip code, and we'll ask a bunch of people who've been here, like, is the zip code correct? And basically, we can build a graph of the world by having people who use Facebook and interact with these real locations participate in it. We had a powered interface that would you could sit down and go through these ad nauseum. You could just sit there and do a ton of these edits for Facebook, and we give you badges. As you can see, Alex is an intern on the team for doing this. Now, there was a bug once when we realized, so we would ask different questions. We'd ask, like, what is the category, what is the street address, what's the zip code, what's the phone number? And someone realized, hey, no one's getting their zip code questions. We built this new interface, it was on mobile. It was much simpler to use, but long story short, we asked a bunch of different questions, and we were like, crap, we stopped giving people these questions. We're hurting our metrics. People are running out of questions. Oh my God, the graph went down. So someone fixed it. And they're like, you know what? I'm going to put the fix behind an A/B test. I'm actually going to test my fix. I know we're fixing it, but maybe some people prefer the older system. We found out everyone we fixed the problem for, all of their metrics crashed. We saw a significant drop in the number of questions that they would answer when they would engage with the system. It took several weeks to figure out exactly what happened. What we figured out was the questions we were accidentally dropping out were the ones that people hated. People really, really hated answering the questions that we had accidentally didn't index. So once we added them in, they were getting a mixture that was worse than getting only questions they liked and getting no more questions. So this then led us to start understanding, okay, what is the propensity to answer a question given the question type and the person type? It led to more elaborate algorithms about how we routed questions and asked people things to both increase the amount of information we were seeing. This was a case where had we not gated, sure we would have seen a drop in overall our metrics had we not gated the bug, but by actually being able to tease out the two groups, oftentimes the drop may be very small. If it's a 5% drop, may chalk it up to typical noise. It's only when you segment your audience and see that this test is having a disproportionately large effect on a large number of your users, you start understanding the impact of it. And then the last one is based on both experiences, also on the Facebook editor team and also in working in gaming. So in gaming, we talk about whales and minnows. Has anyone ever played Farmville or Cityville or any of the Zynga games? Guess they weren't super popular here. Did all right in the States. We had a concept of a whale. A whale would be someone who would come in and spend like $500 on gold coins and a new barn for their farm and a new tractor, and they would get red paint. And a minnow who would be like, I spent 50 cents because it's a game. Why am I spending $500 on this game? And we started to understand, you're like, okay, do I spend, there's way more minnows than there are whales. How much time do I spend on the whales? How much time do I spend on the minnows? So on my current team in Facebook editor, we were like, we need to get new users. We have to grow. We have these goals that we set. We have metrics that we're tracking. We have to grow. Then at some point we started to think, well, okay, we need users clearly, but really what we need is information. We need people to complete this action to answer these questions. Is the quickest way to grow this by getting a bunch of new users? And what we ended up finding out, so it was after a while we're launching all these new services. We built ways to answer these questions across like iOS and Android or on web and on mobile web and internationalize. We're like, we're growing, but we're not growing that fast. Maybe we need to think about something different. Now, this first line here at the bottom was how we thought the number of submissions were by user percentile. So we knew that a person all the way at the end would answer, up to like 1,000 more of these questions in a month than your average user, right? Because how many people really want to correct the zip code of the Mercadona tech offices? Not that many people are interested. But someone who's interested is like really interested. There is a subset of people that are really into like correct data being on the internet. They subscribe to communities. What we ended up looking at, so we actually looked at the data and saw what does the upper percentile contribute to the lower percentile. We saw it wasn't like 1,000, it was actually more like 6,000 to 10,000. The people who were really into it, because we were dealing with this very nuanced behavior, I actually call it the Vegas product model of user driven thinking. So in Vegas, Las Vegas is gambling. There's plenty of casinos here. Oftentimes in a casino, you see a ton of slot machines. And then somewhere in the back, there's a high roller table. Right? So they spend a lot of time and effort on these slot machines, but actually one high roller will spend and gamble more than potentially the entire slot machines in the entire day. Right? And so what they actually do is they focus on a system that moves you in from starting at a slot machine, something that's approachable, it's fun, give you a few drinks, move on to table games. Gamble a little bit more, it feels good, rolling. You've won a little bit. Hey, we can increase the minimum. Hey, would you like a free hotel room? Hey, we'll get you a free table at the club. I don't know if this is a common thing everywhere, but in Las Vegas, in particular, the more you gamble, they will give you free things to get you to stay at their casino. And the reason is because they want to move you from that low-level slots player to a high roller. They understand that it's worth giving you $1,000 of free drinks and a hotel room and a table at the club because you're going to spend $1 million over the course of a week. High rollers can get private jets for them sent to Las Vegas. We figured this out. We actually figured out, okay, we're maybe a bit more in the gambling space, or our user model looks a lot more like that. As I went back to the Uber example, right? Your high-end user is going to be using a lot more rides, but they're still not going to use a ride every single minute of the day. Like there's a kind of upper bound on how much money one user is going to give you, but where you see other systems, for example, content creation, right? YouTube, Facebook, other content platforms focus a lot on the head. The famous people who have a ton of followers, who produce a ton of content, knowing that the top 10% produce a small number, but the top 10% that they produce funnels into everything else. So what we ended up doing is we hired a community manager. We created the Facebook editor conference. We invited people to the office, gave them drinks and food, let them meet the team. We tried to get Zuck to come by. He wasn't having it, but he's like, sent his regards. We gave everybody handouts. We did this in multiple cities across the country, and we actually found that we started growing significantly quicker. We also started building new interfaces to take these highly engaged users and allow them to use the product on more services. So we were focused on people who had never heard of us, introducing them to us. And what we realized is that most people don't want to change zip codes. So what we actually said was, hey, for you, person who really is into doing zip codes, what do you want? Just what do you want? Because clearly you love doing this. And that model, you'd be shocked at how many times companies make this incorrect assumption. They think that we knew that the average number of edits per person was 2. And that had risen from like 1.8, I think, to 2. And we were happy when it rose because we had so many people. But what we actually found was that you can get the top 10% to do an extra 15% more. That actually had way more impact because of what our curve actually looked like. Did we not have the data? Had we not asked those questions? Had we not been going through a data-driven path of experimenting, trying new things, testing our hypotheses, we would, to this day, just continue to put more services on Facebook to introduce people to doing something they had no interest in, instead of nurturing our power users. This doesn't work for every product, but if you don't understand it, you'll never know. On that note, I have some questions. Want to give some time for any questions. Victorian Consulting Group is my consulting company. We're here. I don't work with too many clients, but I'm now actually looking to work with some more European companies. Every client I have now is in the States. I'm tired of making calls super late at night, and I need to improve my Spanish. So these are ways that you can get in touch with me. And whether it's just questions about product management, anything along those lines, I have a lot more time to myself. Thank you.
Si alguien tiene una pregunta, si la quiere hacer en inglés bien, y si no en español también. Y no sé si también me puedes avisar si hay alguien en la computadora que van a hacer preguntas.
That's right. You put enough images in your slides, and there's no question.
Yeah, in Macedonia, we are using Progress, which is a forecasting tool, and one of the rules that to provide forecasting ability to everybody, not only for analysts, not only for data scientists or business people. The question is about how is data culture aspect. Everybody, for example, at Amazon, everybody has access to writing SQL queries and getting information no matter where you're working. You have access to the whole bunch of data that they have. How is the data culture aspect?
Yeah.
Same thing or?
No, it's a good question. And the data culture is varies highly by company. And you have kind of data-driven companies, which are there's no data, I don't care. Product-driven, whatever the PM says goes. Engineering, if the engineer says it's cool, do it. So at Facebook, everyone has access to almost all of the data. There's some data that's particularly private. Also, when it comes to personal data, so one thing I always like to say, because I can, is the quickest way to get fired at Facebook is to look at someone's data. Everyone always thinks that we're just sitting there looking at people's messages, laughing at what people are texting. There are several systems that if you accidentally stumble across the data, it will block you and stop you and tell you to get your manager approval and get a written affidavit from the person. I digress. But when it comes to general anonymized statistics, how many times is the iOS app open versus the Android app? So going back to that internal structure that I mentioned, there's the large data warehouse that everyone has access to. It's harder to use. There's a training that's available for everybody. Engineers, product managers, and the data analytics and science team typically are going to be the ones who have gone through some training to dig deep into the data. The last part of the training, is like around 1 week or 2 weeks, is actually to take a problem at Facebook that you think, do the data and put together a presentation and present it to the rest of the class on this data. So a lot of people have a lot of access to the information and data, and then typically there's a level of question asking that gets too complex for mere mortals. And that's when we bring in the PhD data science team. Like, sit in a room somewhere with no windows, just looking at numbers. And the way I explain statistical significance, they would laugh at me because they all have PhDs in statistics. And so oftentimes there would be a level of question asking, a level of variance, correlation, or experimentation, and they would be brought in. They could go in and look over 6 years of historical data and tell you exactly the tease out that iPhone 6.4 users have exactly a 2% less monetization potential than iPhone 6.7 users, assuming that was the question. So everyone has access to the data. This actually also goes to for the code base. It only takes 2 Facebook employees to kill Facebook, for lack of a better word. Anyone can submit code changes. And the culture is that if everyone has access to it, if everyone can look at it, there's no Hippo, because I can go check and call BS on your numbers. Going back to the Hippo, one thing is you're asking about the data culture. One big thing which I really enjoyed about the company is your level is kind of a secret. You're actually not really supposed to tell people whether you're a level 5, 6, 7, or 8 PM, because if I'm in a room and we're debating the truth of a decision to be made, it does not matter that you're a director and I'm not a director. It doesn't matter that he's a senior engineer and he's a junior engineer. All that matters is the truth. It's one of the things that we did. So everyone has access to all the data, all the metrics, a lot of things like that. So everyone can either validate or test or question these types of things. No problem.
Could you talk a bit more about your experience, if you've done anything with predictive analytics?
Yeah, so we never successfully predicted the things we were trying to predict, is what I'll say. Predictive analytics, and I was in gaming around 2012, 2011, which was a bit of the golden age. Everyone was making money, gaming was great, everyone was downloading games. So predictive analytics was very big because it was very much trying to understand what actions in the first day, 1 hour, 2 hour, 24 hours of your app experience is the best predictive indicator of long-term sustainability, whether it be lifetime value, sharing, so growth with your ability to share to someone else. We looked at a couple different systems. It was hard. It was complicated. Basically the problem was there's too many, and this is before machine learning got as popular as it is now, but there are too many variables to try and understand and predict this specifically. When I moved into advertising measurement, we did have, systems have gotten a lot better. We had an internal AI system that we could use to build data models on. The crowdsourcing team that I mentioned, we did a lot of machine learning to try and predict convergence of the truth. So given that 3 people in Spain said this zip code or the city is Valencia, 1 person in England said it was actually Sevilla, how do we need to ask another person in Spain, or actually should we ignore this person? And what we would do is build machine learning models to say, okay, the last time we were in a situation with X number of signals based on a trust score, it would be a trust score of the person itself along with the question that was being asked and the importance of the place itself. We would predict, and instead of just having originally the system was very simple. X number of people say yes, X minus X number of people saying no, yes. And what we moved to was more of a predictive system to say, given this place, the trust level of this person, the type of information, when we've seen this the last 800,000 times, were we actually able to set it correctly with one less question? And when you start shaving off, one data validation point for very large data sets, you actually end up significantly increasing your throughput.
Yeah, so did you end up building a model of your users there where you basically simplified them down to a set of dimensions where this is a person of the type where they're the whale, they score a 10 on the whale scale?
Yeah, it actually was several systems. So instead of, originally it was, how correct has this person been in the past? How many times have they been wrong? And it was more or less a number, right? It was kind of a percentage, but it also was weighted based on how many answers. Instead, we turned it into a predictive model that would predict what their trust score would be based on what we've seen from them and other people. Yeah. So that was now a predictive model to predict the score. Then instead of just the old model would be once the score reaches above X based on the numbers of these 5 people, that now became another predictive model that just said the answer is yes or no based on and we try to simplify it because the number of characteristics you add to predictive models typically can easily exponentially expand the complexity of the problem, right? So if we're looking at 8 different things times another 8 different things times another 8 different things, if you add in 1, it significantly increases the scope of the problem. If you add 1 to another characteristic, it actually compounds. So we try to simplify it, and more or less what we kind of ended up converging on was predictive models around a person's trust score, and then I think we ended up adding it per information data type. So it's not just your trust score, it's your trust score for given categories. Then it would be, given that we have all these predictive models, feeding in from each different individual piece of information. It was another predictive model to say, can I predict convergence and truth based on that? I'm missing, there's a few other components, but yeah, we slowly transitioned all our system from the older, simpler algorithm to all being predictive models when it came to converging on truth. And the goal was to turn down the number of questions we had to get answered in order to set a value on the system. When it came to more like marketing and analytics, that we saw some successes, we saw some non-successes. There are a few companies that actually I know specifically were targeted for game developers on predictive analytics. Like, just give us all your data, and we will actually be able to score all of your users between 0 and 1 based on a propensity to buy, retain, and share with someone else.
Yeah, it's an interesting approach because you're using retrospective data analysis to build your model, and then that model is running in real time to affect the outputs of your system, and that's all feeding back, as opposed to just looking at Google Analytics, which is purely retrospective analysis.
Well, even Google Analytics is starting to do some interesting things around their insights products where they're saying, hey, we predicted that the number of referrals you would have gotten from Twitter would have been 80 today, and it's actually 40. A 50% drop is statistically outside of what we would have predicted. Therefore, you may want to look into your Twitter analytics. I know I've seen this on mobile. I think you can get it also on the website. But, Google's been very big in terms of predictive analytics. And you're seeing a lot of this, especially in the ad space, right? So can we predict what type of creative to show you, given 3 different creatives, given what we know about you, given what has worked? Facebook also, too, when it comes to the algorithm, both for ad delivery, does a lot of predictive analytics. If you use Facebook Pixel, for example, right, it will try and learn the conversion events, the type of people that you showed them. What do all the people that converted have in common from the generally publicly available data? And then let's target your advertising to people we think, or if you use lookalike audiences, for example, for targeting, a lot of this is predictive analytics, trying to use both past data signals in addition to, there's kind of ways of catering the new data, the new signals that you pick up to be better training data for your past systems as opposed to just based on randomly assigning to people. I may pick 5 people that I think will have a disproportionate amount of truth to my predictive analytics system. Hopefully I didn't get too nerdy for everybody. Yeah.
Can you comment from your experience how you use some kind of unsupervised learning methods for good case analysis? For example, something does not work and you have thousands of variables,
Yes.
and you don't know how to start?
Yeah, it's actually another interview question. So one of my favorite interview questions was, you came into work, you're the PM for Instagram on Android. The amount of time spent in the Instagram feed has dropped 25% overnight. Like, what do you do? I'm your data scientist. Ask me questions. When it comes to doing root cause analysis, a lot of times I do like to go big and too small, right? So you can start picking up random things like, well, what time of day did it happen? Just like, was it, which country, things like that. But if you split your universe into, there's typically like 3 causes. One is internal causes, so you did something to your application. 2 are like side effects, someone else did something within the application to your product, and then external factors. Right, so the answer to my question was there was actually a power outage in the entire country of Brazil. And like that is actually why your stats went down. It's made up example, but what I would lead the person to is they would ask, did we change anything? No, you didn't change anything. Like, what are the other metrics that come into play? And then understanding the interrelation of the metric. So given that you found a root cause, let's say you've been able to isolate it down to Brazil. So typically it's kind of a question back and forth. They started with all the internal cases. They asked what other teams did, whether there's some other impact. Now they're kind of looking to the news almost to figure out what happened. They see that there's the drop is geographic based, right? You've looked at a bunch of different parameters, and you want to split your audience into different cohorts. So a lot of times that's the first question. So if something happened to everybody, did it actually happen to everybody, or did it disproportionately happen to some group of people? If you can find out what that group was, then you can find out, was there a subgroup within it? Then if you actually find out what it was, so in this case, all the users in Brazil stopped using Instagram for some 8-hour period, whatever it may be, You can then start looking into alternative things. Did they log in and they didn't look on the news feed at all? Was their phone on? Like, do we know like what happened? Were their accounts deactivated? And in this case, you potentially actually start looking into the news to say what happened in Brazil that day, that type of thing. So when it does come to that root cause analysis, it is kind of thinking of the different categories you want to be MISI, mutually exclusive, computationally exhaustive, I forget what the C stands for. It's exhaust. Basically, you want buckets that encapsulate every possibility, right? So I started with kind of this like world, inside, outside. It may then go into inside apps. It's your growth, like what about people entering the app? What were people doing inside of the app? Where is it people not returning to the app? Right? You can break that down into a couple different components. Okay, it was people didn't get into the app in the first place. Did they open it and didn't scroll? Did they open it and there was no information on their feed? What was their experience? And kind of go through it that way. It is oftentimes a dark art. There was one time I spent 2 months trying to figure out a 15% drop in revenue. We never figured it out. We just had to launch new stuff to get the money back. To this day, I still do not know what happened for the users. It was a slots game on iOS, actually.
Okay, so what would be a good strategy for changing the mindset and the culture of a company that doesn't have particularly a data-driven approach? And how would you start changing it? Because they need it.
Yeah. So usually I start with bribes. If everyone gets a bonus, and you say like your bonus is tied to how much data you talk, no, I'm joking. So it does depend on the organization, the kind of issues they're facing, right? So some cases it's like, hey, we don't really think about data, we haven't thought about it, and oftentimes they just need one case study of like, look how good this did, or you take one project, maybe you try and optimize or show information on one aspect, and everyone loves it. So sometimes it's almost like they wanted it, it's just that it didn't exist. So it's more of getting the right tools in the right hands of the right people, right? Giving something that the marketing team can use, your data analysts can use, your engineers can look at, your product managers can look at, things like that. Some cases it's that they have all the data they want. No one cares to use it because, I guess, and if I guess right, I get promoted. So therefore, data seems cool, but like really bravado is like what drives this organization. Oftentimes in those cases, you find like top down can help a lot. If management says, don't bring me anything without data, I give that example of when Facebook was looking to get good at mobile. It was, don't bring me any designs without mobile. Everyone did mobile. When the incentives are, when you see importance, when the decision makers are saying that we want data to drive these decisions, there will be a desire to do that because that is directly what will lead to benefits of the company. In other cases, there's like so many different options. Sometimes bribes can actually work. I was joking, but in reality, there are cases of companies will say, top data questions that are being answered. If you, there have been cases I've seen of where if your team does research in terms of solving a data problem, they will literally get everyone together in the company, all hands. You'll get to present your results to everyone, and you'll get a bonus or a plaque or something along those lines. Literally, it ends up being kind of this more core human. Once I see that being data driven and being successful benefits me, my team, my product, and the company, I will strive to do it more. Sometimes it's just the training, so people want the data, there are the tools, they don't know how to use it. You can do a large-scale training system. With one client I'm working with now, we're actually moving from one data platform, which was kind of harder and more annoying for people to understand because it was built internally, and we're using an analytics platform as a service, and that came with a bunch of training, significantly easier. So before you need to write SQL to do your dashboards, now you can drag and drop. That has gotten people excited about doing data. One thing too we've done in the company even is had data brainstorm. So it's like, hey, what about your job would be easier if you had some numbers on a dashboard or in a report somewhere? And people start thinking about it. It's like, well, I never thought about it, but I could actually answer customer support calls easier if I understood, the type of problem this person traditionally had, or on average, is today a high volume call day, so I should kind of work on closing tickets faster versus it's slower, so I can spend more time. Maybe I'm buying one. I remember what for me was marketing team is doing marketing. All their new users are crap. Everyone they send and they buy and send into the app, they don't buy anything. They don't like the purple unicorn that walks on 2 legs instead of 4. I need something, I need something fixed. And data actually ended up helping me solve that problem, whereas I understood my customer acquisition costs by channel and how the marketing team was allocating their spend. So they're like, we're going to go get the cheapest users. And I'm like, the cheapest users are $1 less and they're worth $10 less. We're much better off spending an extra dollar up front because we will make the money back. These are type of things that, keep my product afloat, or, we'll get my entire team a offsite to Las Vegas, which happened once, and then we all went sailing once. Another team actually crushed it, going back to bribes. They crushed their user goals. They flew the entire team to Hawaii from California for like a 3-day vacation. And, if free trips to vacation islands don't get you convinced that data will improve your life, it's going to be hard at that point. But no, it's a tough question, and it oftentimes depends on the company. Some companies, it's like, we don't know what we're doing. Some companies, it's like, we don't want to do that because it's a fad, we don't believe in it. In other cases, there's a million different spots in between.
Thank you.
Not a problem. Cool. Well, if that's it, I'll be hanging around because I heard there's free beer. Otherwise, I'm going home now. I'm joking. So, any questions, and feel free to email me, ping me, LinkedIn, things along those lines. I'm around.